Battle Shonen is one of the most popular genres in all of anime. And for good reason. Who doesn't like to see epic fights, heroes overcoming all odds and defeating the almighty villains? Main characters train for days, weeks, or months on end just to be able to put a dent into the seemingly invincible facade of their mortal enemy. However, just as satisfying as it is to see the protagonist overcome overwhelming power with sheer effort and determination, it is also quite nice to see a good guy bulldoze over any and all foes that dare stand in his way. However, that approach does bring some issues with it. If your protagonist is ultra powerful, any and all conflict would be rendered useless, as the main character can just deal with it with ease. And yet, despite this, some of the most well-liked and critically acclaimed anime feature overpowered characters in some way, shape or form. And yet, these shows still manage to craft a narrative that contains tension and struggle. When looking at a lot of the more mediocre and even some of the good fantasy or isekai shows, overpowered self-insert protagonist is the easiest and most common pitfall they fall into. And this often takes the fun out of what is often a well-crafted world with interesting ideas behind it. That's why, in this video, we will be taking a look at some of the most well-liked and best executed overpowered characters in anime, what makes them tick, and how they can still make for an interesting and entertaining story. The first category of overpowered characters doesn't even really fit the category in my opinion, but I'm still including it because I know some people will complain if I don't. And those characters fall into the category of overpowered, but not really. When talking about powerful anime characters, the name of your classic shonens always pop up, be it Naruto, Ichigo, or, and this one gets mentioned especially often, Goku. Now, you might already see the issue with including these characters in this conversation, but if you don't, let me explain. While these characters are certainly very powerful in their own right and could defeat characters from other shows with ease, they aren't the end-all be-all when it comes to power in their own universe. Because even though they are very strong and often continue to get stronger and stronger throughout the story, there's always an opponent who matches or exceeds them in strength. So in that sense, these characters are really overpowered when compared to others in the universe, and compelling fights, or even fights where the protagonist is the underdog, can easily happen in these stories. When talking about actually overpowered anime characters, there's one that surely comes to everyone's mind: Saitama from One Punch Man. While most other anime rely on reality warping abilities to make their characters stand above the rest, Saitama doesn't need any of that. His powers are simple. As the name suggests, he can just defeat every and all opponents with a single punch. And I think, in all its simplicity, One Punch Man has become a sort of blueprint for other shows to model the usage of their overpowered characters after, while still maintaining an interesting and exciting narrative. The first step to doing that is showing the audience that there is no way the main character can lose. Many others try to create artificial tension by pretending the protagonist could possibly lose, which falls flat when they are clearly much more powerful. But the creator of One Punch Man, never bothers with their pretense in the first place. From the first moment, it is made clear that Saitama would win every fight he ever participates in, and there's no one that could even hope to challenge him. But that gives him the opportunity to delve deeper into the psyche of Saitama, because when I watch stories with overpowered characters, the fights themselves, while often nice to watch, don't really entice me enough by themselves, as they lack any sort of tension. What I really want to see, what One Punch Man does wonderfully, is to explore how a person acts when he is this powerful. If you had to sum up Saitama's personality in one word, it would be indifference. Both in his daily life as well as in his hero duties, he doesn't treat anything seriously. While being a hero was a dream of his when he was younger, the lack of opponents who can really challenge him quickly took away all of his fun. Since his desire to fight strong opponents that can challenge him can't be satisfied, Saitama has fallen into sort of existential crisis. Due to this, his emotions have also died dramatically, with him finding it hard to find joy and excitement even in everyday life. However, while Saitama's character is certainly interesting, One Punch Man is a parody of shonen anime at the end of the day, and those obviously feature tons of fights. Now, it can certainly be fun to see the big villain be defeated in a single punch, but you'd expect that gimmick to grow old relatively quickly. But that's where one's next masterstroke comes in. After the initial arcs, where the premise of the show is established, Saitama often takes a backseat on the action, sometimes rarely appearing for quite a while. This gives the side characters more screen time, lets them face challenges and battles head on without being protected by an all-powerful being. In fact, I would argue Saitama being this powerful enables these characters to face tougher challenges than they would have otherwise. Normally, if you put your main characters face to face with a strong opponent, you'd have to be careful not to make this opponent too strong in order to prevent writing yourself into a corner. If you don't have a plausible way to get these characters out of the situation and have to rely on plot contrivances and deus ex machinas to resolve this conflict, it cheapens the impact of it. In this case, however, that's not really a problem. Saitama works as a sort of plot device. You can just beat the enemy if things get too dire for the rest of the cast. And it doesn't feel cheap or out of place at all, as this is the entire premise of the show. Many good shows with overpowered protagonists, like Misfit at the Demon King Academy or Eminence in Shadow for example, certainly took some inspiration how they handle their main characters from One Punch Man. One himself, however, outdoes himself in his next work, Mob Psycho 100, and pushes the archetype of overpowered main character in a completely new and interesting direction. Although I think One Punch Man is a more mainstream and generally more liked show, I personally prefer Mob Psycho. One Punch Man Season 1 set the benchmark for action animation, while the second season was a letdown for sure. Those 12 episodes still stand the test of time today, with few other shows hitting the astronomical highs that it has. Mob Psycho, on the other hand, isn't quite as flashy. The art style takes some getting used to, and it's not as action-packed from beginning to end as One Punch Man is. However, when it comes to story, and especially character development, Mob Psycho just does it better than One Punch Man ever could. And the focal point of this character development is the main character, Shigeo Kageyama. Similarly to Saitama, he's very powerful. Overwhelmingly so, in fact, but he doesn't really want to use his powers. When he was young, there was an incident in which he accidentally hurt his younger brother with his psychic powers. In order to prevent something like this from happening again, he suppresses his emotions, which in turn limits the psychic power he can use. The interesting part here is that the overpoweredness isn't really used or seen as a strength, but instead as a kind of weakness of Kageyama. Because while losing his cool does make him inconceivably powerful, he also loses control, which is what he fears the most. So, while him losing control and unleashing his full powers is certainly a feast for the eyes, animation-wise, it's not the main selling point of the show. Mob Psycho, at its core, is a story about Kageyama growing up, about opening up again after staying silent and passive for most of his life, while learning to cope with all the newfound emotions that come with it. While dealing with all sorts of supernatural shenanigans, he still has to live the life of a regular high school student, which is just as, if not more important to him. And narratively speaking, his emotional outbursts, where he loses control, aren't used to simply end the conflict between humans and whatever supernatural enemies that oppose them. They're just as important to furthering Mob's character development. But where these two shows perfectly illustrate how a main character with overwhelming power should be handled, there's a recent trend which handles these characters in a totally different way. Because while having your main character be able to solve every problem with ease is something that can be a problem for a story in the long run, that problem doesn't exist when that overpowered character is instead relegated to simply being a side character. Two shows that do exactly this and that immediately come to mind are Jujutsu Kaisen with Gojo and my favorite show, ReZero, with Reinhardt. And they avoid the main character issue in a similar way that One Punch Man does, when instead of making the main character have less frequent appearances, they just make him a side character instead. Now, to be fair, that also brings its own fair share of issues. If there is a character capable of solving all the issues that cast is facing, why doesn't he just do that? But the answer is quite simple. Make the character unable or unwilling to help for that specific conflict. Gojo, for example, doesn't interfere in the beginning to help his students grow with combat, and later on gets sealed away when the conflict turns serious. Maybe not the most elegant solution to the problem, but one that certainly works nonetheless. The case of ReZero though is in my opinion quite a bit more interesting. Not only is Reinhardt the most powerful character in the universe by a country mile, there is also not really a weakness of his that can be exploited. He's so loved by the world, in fact, that he can just wish for an ability and receive it. Even against an opponent that is literally invincible, he's able to fight him to a standstill. And yet, he doesn't ruin the tension of the show at all. Why is that? Well, there are several reasons. Some of the antagonists have powers that bend the rules of the world to their will, making them not automatically lose in the face of overwhelming power. But most importantly, Reinhardt, while being immensely powerful, is still a kind and compassionate human at the end of the day. Conflicts in ReZero happen all across the world, and Reinhardt can't be present for all of them. What's more, he's so powerful that his mere presence is considered a threat by other countries, making it so that he can't cross any borders if he doesn't want to be the cause of a war breaking out. I think we can all agree that super powerful characters can deliver some of the most fun, epic and hype scenes the medium has to offer. There's just a certain kind of magic to watching the strongest characters that exist duke it out on the screen. But with great power comes great responsibility. Making the character too powerful has taken the wind out of the sails of many promising shows. It is a sort of balancing act between power and entertainment, one that not many authors are capable of. One really is a visionary when it comes to that, revolutionizing a concept that has existed for ages and creating two of the most well-liked and highest rated shows using that concept. Season 2 of One Punch Man might not have lived up to the high expectations Season 1 set, but I for one am excited for what they're able to do with Season 3. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing and commenting.